Well, here we are, 3 minutes past, so let's get into it. So, firstly, thank you. Welcome to tonight's masterclass. Really appreciate you guys taking the hour out of your respective lives, irrespective where you are. There is a chat window in Zoom if you haven't used it before. Feel free to pop any questions in there and I will address those at the end. I'm planning the actual presentation to take around 40 minutes. And then we will get a bit of a good Q&A and see if I can help you in any way. Some of you responded to the Calendly invitation with some notes, which I have around things that are top of mind for you right now. So I'm hoping today is going to address some of that for you. Hopefully you've got a pen and paper, and I did email you this morning a worksheet for communicating effectively, which should be in your inbox. If it's not, let me know, but I'll walk you through some of that today. But I'll be taking you through that as a communication cheat sheet, which can also help you have some fairly difficult conversations. It's important for me to also say that there is no sell here. This is a simple invite at the end if you want to pursue any, this work any further. We're not the sort of organisation or business that uses these platforms to sell. It's more education and awareness. So today's masterclass is appropriately titled No More Drama, a practical guide for men to improve relationship communication. So before we get into that, I guess a little bit about me so you know who I am and while I feel qualified to sit here and do this work with you. I coach couples to a better future together by helping them understand really the relationships themselves and turn them into a series of small achievable steps. Often people get stuck in relationships with a big mountain to climb and don't realize that you can simply take one step at a time if you know what steps to take. I'm formally trained in a modality called emotional intimacy, which I've studied, and as a result of that, have a Sydney-based relationship coach. The author of a book called Man Unplugged, Exploring the Inner Man, which I wrote in 2014, and co-founder of this business Retune.life with my wife Amanda, who I met 5 years ago. I've presented keynotes at various conferences and events, spoken to lots of men and couples around the troubles that challenge them today, and really got my experience in men's gatherings, retreats, men's groups, and co-facilitating retreats for men both here and overseas. And I tend to find men coming to me in the 28 to 30 and the 40 to 44 transitions, or for couples, interestingly, who've been in marriage for 20 to 22 years. There seems to be a barrier that relationships hit at about that time, as mine previous one did. And after coaching many men and improving their relationships and going through a few struggles of my own through life, as we all do, we've created some tools and resources, well, for men like you. So my work and writing focuses on establishing healthy connections with others, whether it's intimate relationships, friends, family, or work colleagues. So what are we going to be covering tonight? We're going to be covering what is a relationship, how did we get to where we are, what makes for better conversation, and how to break unhealthy dialogue patterns. So my plan for you this evening is that you'll leave here with the tools you need to communicate effectively and a template for navigating even tough conversations, crucial conversations. So this is a masterclass. There's lots to share. So buckle up and have your pens ready. Take plenty of notes. As I said, you'll get a copy of the recording, and you'll also you've got that cheat sheet which I emailed you today. If any hassles, let me know. And I'll also send you a couple of ebooks you haven't got already that we've one recently published that hasn't gone out yet as a gift for attending tonight. So please make note of any questions, and there'll be a Q&A in the end. If a question comes to you during the presentation, just stick it in the chat window and I'll address them all at the end. So I guess one of the first questions people ask is, well, what actually is a relationship? We all have our own meaning of what a relationship means for us. And in general, we want to receive and give love and feel safe and valued and feel seen. Relationships are incredibly fertile grounds for personal development. That's certainly been my experience. But we read a quote a couple of years ago, which really sent us on this entire trajectory. And we developed some intellectual property around this that's helped a lot of couples that I'm going to share with you tonight. And the question or the definition was that a relationship is not two people, it's actually the space in between. And if you actually think about that, the relationship itself is a system. It's something that's been constructed. It's unique to you. And if you're in a relationship, your intimate partner, no one has that relationship but you. So there's, billions of those on the planet. And even your relationship with your kids, if you have children and you have a wife, her relationship with your children will be different to your relationship with your children. So every relationship is unique. It has what we call its own unique ourness. And when we came up with this concept of the definition of a relationship is the space between, we realized that that space is really a third party. It's almost like a construct that we can contribute to. And we named it the relationship field. And we did that because we likened the relationship itself to a third party where you and perhaps intimate partner created something. And often what happens, we forget to tend and nourish and nurture that space. And so what happens as a result of that is it becomes a bit of a barren landscape. And then the emotional intimacy that resides in that place becomes missing. And so what happens in that level of ourness when we first started to build it is we actually build a culture. So a relationship has its own way of doing things. If you imagine that you've come in from your own family's culture and your partner's come in from their family's culture, and often you can have a clash of cultures, different ways of doing things. Neither of one is right. In fact, both of them are. There are implicit and explicit expectations. Implicit, the ones that we don't often talk about. We need to be aware of and using each other's love languages. We might have rituals, like the good old Sunday night roast or the Saturday cafe breakfasts. We often have shared dreams and goals, although not many couples actually discuss those things, unfortunately. And we can create memories and shared experiential intimacy, which we'll come to in a little while. I guess for most couples, the question I would ask them is, what does your relationship field look like? Is it the one on the left where it's neat and tidy and being tended and nourished and nurtured and cherished? Or is it the one on the right where not much maintenance has happened? Sadly, we get a lot of phone calls in our free 15-minute calls that we advertise on our website where someone will ring and say, my wife's left with the kids 3 weeks ago and I'm now home alone, desperately lonely, and want to work out what I can do to get her back. And sadly, by this stage, the horse is often bolted. It's like leaving, having the squeaky wheel on the car, but not fixing it for 10 years. And then suddenly the car's clapped out, sitting on the side of the road. There's no wheels left. The whole thing's been stripped. It's a rusty wreck. And somehow we've got to try and get that car back on the road. And often it's simply too late. So if we knew from the beginning what to do to maintain relationships, it would make life a lot easier. So the question we have to ask ourselves when we're communicating with someone is, what are we putting in to that space between? Are we throwing in hand grenades, napalm, Roundup, or are we together nurturing and cherishing the relationship? And if you think about it from the point of view of relationship maintenance like a garden, if you as a couple decide, based on the information that you're going to learn tonight, that you want to move forward and make the relationship something valid and cherished, and you recognize that the garden's a bit like the one on the right, and you've got to do some heavy lifting to get in there and take out the weeds, start tilling the soil, which can take time, and then to do some planting, which can also take time to bear fruit, but it does. It's a joint effort. So together you build the relationship, together you can repair the relationship, but it must take two of you to do it. And we now know, for example, that in intimate relationships, men in particular who have a relationship live happier, healthier, and longer lives. There's a big longitudinal study that was done in the States over 40-something years that showed just that men who have good relationships, not only intimate relationships, but relationships, social relationships with friends and family, actually live longer, happier, healthy lives. And really what it boils down to is not doing lots of big, grand gestures, but doing what we call the small things often. What we tend to forget is that as relationships from the beginning then start to become a little bit more ingrained, we get a bit complacent, and we forget to do those daily acts of fondness, admiration, and appreciation. We forget to say thank you when our partner makes us something, and we forget to focus on what matters. Often kids come along, we have a job, and suddenly the pressures of life, the logistics of life, particularly if you're a parent, you've got 3 nights a week like I do for sports runs for one of my sons, it's very easy to forget that you need to put maintenance into the relationship and maintain that relationship field. It's important to celebrate the important things and work together and recognize, as I said earlier, that the relationship itself is an actual construct. And together you can maintain, build, nourish, cherish, and nurture that space. If we want the spark, we're exploring new things together. And really, a relationship can be thought of as three components. One is obviously the spark, one is comfort and certainty, and the third one is the ability for emotional connection. In the emotional intimacy training I did, captive audience during COVID, I was sitting on my couch in late 2020, September 2020. Amanda was a student at the Coaching Institute studying behavioural psychology. I was working from home because of COVID lockdown in Sydney. And she had an opportunity to get on a 3-day paid event, a 3-day emotional intimacy boot camp. I found it absolutely incredible. I'd been working with men for quite some time, but hadn't realised the subtleties of the emotional intimacy piece. And what we've realised through the training that we've had both in 2020 and 2021 is that the emotional intimacy is the underpinning of all healthy relationships. And sadly, it's the first thing that gets jettisoned. It's the first thing that gets lost. It's the first thing that goes missing when the maintenance of the relationship is not happening. We want the spark back. You know, when we started our relationships, there was fun. We did adventurous things. We went out. We had those shared experiences together. We gave those shared experiences shared meaning. We pushed ourselves outside our comfort zone. We were curious and we explored what that meant. And that spark, that passion that was there, obviously wanes over time, but you can do things to keep it alive. And emotional intimacy is the underpinning of that. We want comfort and certainty. We want to make sure that our partner has got our back and that we've got theirs. There's a huge amount of trust involved in intimate relationships. We believe, and this is backed up by the research, that although love needs to be present in a relationship, it's actually not the foundation. The foundation of all relationships is trust. So when you meet someone for the first time and you go out on a date, you start to assess them. Are they a trustworthy person? Are they telling me the truth? Do they show up on time? Do they call me when they say they will? And every time we do that from both sides, imagine that you're standing on one edge of the riverbank and the other person standing on the other side of the riverbank. Every time that we do what we say we will do and that we're authentic and honest in our engagements, we start to put planks of trust down on the bridge. And eventually those planks meet in the middle and we now have a relationship where we feel that we can trust our partners. Many a situation where a partner infidelity happens in the relationship. So someone goes and has an affair, for example, love can still be there, but trust is often catastrophically broken and sometimes the relationship can't recover from that. So comfort and certainty are very much based on trust, and we need those aspects in a relationship to feel safe. And finally, we want the emotional connection itself. As I mentioned before, emotional intimacy comes from having open-hearted and vulnerable conversations, expressing our fears, our insecurities, our needs, and our desires. We say the word intimacy is into me see. And one of the challenges that men generally have is our inability, purely through the education that we received or the lack of education that we received around the subject. And as a result of that, we find it very difficult to express from our feeling selves what's actually going on under the bonnet. In fact, the biggest complaint I hear from most women is that their men are emotionally unavailable. What that means is where women will process outwardly and have conversations with their girlfriends and siblings and sisters and mothers and all that sort of stuff. What they're doing in those conversations and social conversations is they're processing their thinking outwardly. We men generally process inwardly. We'll go into our inner physical man cave, the shed or the garage or a room in a house, or we'll process inwardly. We'll go for a walk and mull over what's actually troubling us because it takes us longer to do that processing. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. Within all of this, obviously, conversation and communication is a key to it all, particularly when it's verbal communication, because words have power. We can choose language that can be supportive. We can choose language that can be negative. We can choose language that can be neutral. We can choose language that can be hurtful. And this underpins all our engagements and communication. And in that, do you feel seen, heard, understood, valued, and cared for? And this is where our behavior, attitude, language all have power. And you learn how to wield that power in healthy ways. Oh, someone's joining us. Welcome, Damesh. Welcome, Damesh. Hopefully you can hear us. We just into the slides. So how we show up in the relationship field that I mentioned earlier is really critical as to how the relationship will evolve and therefore the quality of the relationship itself. We know that our words can hurt someone, but our words can heal too. So it's up to us to be very mindful about the language that we're using, both verbal and non-verbal language, and what we're putting into that space we called earlier the relationship field. This is a model called the ARE model that I want to introduce you to. It's from a doctor called Dr. Sue Johnson, a clinical psychologist and world-renowned relationship psychologist that we follow and have read some of her work in the UK. And she's a specialist on what's called attachment style behavior in adult relationships. And the ARE model is really a question about, are you there? Are you with me? And the first part of the ARE model, A stands for accessibility. That means, can I reach you? Are you switched off, distracted, stuck on social media, have a gaming addiction or any other form of addiction, and therefore I can't actually reach you. I can't get access to you. I can't talk with you and have an intimate, vulnerable, honest, open-hearted conversation. Are you responsive? Can I rely on you to respond to me emotionally, not just for words, yes or no, but actually have an engaging conversation? That if I come to you and say to you, hey, I'm feeling scared, tired, upset, sad, whatever my state is, can I rely on you to respond to me in that emotional way? And the third letter E stands for engagement. Do I know you will value me and stay close? Again, there's that trust element. And so it's really important that we understand that the ARE model around accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement are crucial if we're to maintain emotional intimacy with our partners and keep those communication channels open. When we come into a relationship, we start to assess the person that we're in the relationship with. And unfortunately, it's not until often sometime in months or years that we start to realize that our partner came into the relationship with some emotional baggage, the emotional resume. I'm sure you guys have worked in businesses where a new player has come in, a new person has come into the company, and the resume looks great on paper, technically, or in terms of experience, but we don't know their emotional resume. We don't know what baggage they're bringing into the business. And I've heard many situations in businesses where a bad apple, to use that word, comes into the business and all hell can break loose because they can be very disruptive to the culture. And it's the same with relationships. When we meet someone, we don't know their full history. It takes time to learn who they are, where they came from, what were the wounds that they suffered as children that they actually inadvertently and unconsciously bring into the relationship. So family history is really important, and the current family dynamics. And there can also be cross-cultural issues, which can be quite strong. We've worked with people from Southern Europe, around Italy, Greece, where family culture is very strong. I've coached some people from China. One man recently who's still a client. We catch up once a month. He's a mentor student of mine. And he's very, very, very Chinese in the sense that he's only been out here a few years, and his way of thinking, particularly around relationships, I find incredibly challenging. He and I have some interesting conversations because his way of seeing the world from the point of view of relationships is totally different to mine. And so trying to help him navigate his wife and being a new father with a newborn baby and what that means to them and how they would navigate that is very different to the way we do it. So with that comes beliefs, values, and expectations. What are the beliefs that we carry? Where do they come from? What are our personal values? What are our partner's values? Do we have combined family values? And if so, what are they? What are the expectations? When my eldest son, who's almost 21, had his first girlfriend, I said to him after a few weeks, it was very evident that it had become a sexual relationship. And I said to him, hey, have you guys had a conversation around monogamy? And he went, what do you mean? So will you guys now announce that you're in a relationship? Have you actually had a conversation saying, my definition of monogamy is that while ever we're together, we will be exclusive? And he went, oh, no. Well, don't you just assume that? Sadly, no. So expectations are often implicit, and it's important that we be explicit with our expectations of what we expect from our partners and how we want them to be within the relationship. We also could discuss our goals and dreams. Where do we see ourselves in 5 to 10 years? What does our relationship look like? What does our living and our lifestyle look like? What are our needs and insecurities? What are we afraid of? What childhood wounds are embedded in our psychology? And what are our trigger points? Triggers are incredibly complex. Amanda and I have been doing a lot of work on that over the last 12 months. We're just about to push out some new ideas around consolidating not only our own learnings, but also that of multiple teachers on the planet, because only a week ago we saw a deeper level of how triggers neurophysiologically also work within our brain from MRI scans that have been done and research that's been done. We've cracked some ideas about how that sort of all fits in together. And fundamentally out of all of this, the question that we want in intimate relationships is, do I feel safe to share all of me? As I said before, trust is the foundation of all intimate relationships. And that's what we really are looking for. Ultimately is, can I trust you to take all of me? My good, my bad, my highs, my lows. Am I too much? Am I not enough? Am I good enough? Do I belong? Do you love me? Am I seen? Am I heard? Am I understood? So let's just take a bit of a pause and think of the question, well, how did we get here? When we're in the early stages of a relationship, things are new and exciting. We're focused on each other's happiness, and we're trying to get to know each other and understand each other, our likes and dislikes. And then later, we've made some mistakes along the way. We might have cocked up with something. We didn't think about something. We were not so thoughtful as we could have been. Upsets have occurred. We've had arguments, which are natural, by the way. Conflict's inevitable. And those arguments may have compounded, and things then gradually starts to change. And our communication then can become miscommunication. We can make assumptions. We can make things up. We can look at a situation and not check in. Was my interpretation or perspective of that situation actually valid? Or did I see it and make up a story in my head? I know what that look means. Well, do you really? It's amazing for Amanda and me to work with couples who believe that after a few years of being together, you suddenly develop this incredible capability of being able to read minds. And as a result of that, we just make up all these stories and all these assumptions about what's going on for our partners. And we just lose the capacity for some reason to actually check in. And one of the important things I'll share with you before we move on is the really remember to check in the difference between action and intent, or intent and impact. You can have an intention to do something, you take an action, and the action is completely misinterpreted from what the intent was, or the impact that you have is completely different to the impact you intended. Very common in intimate relationships. And sadly, because we haven't been taught the skills to check in, using particular phraseology that I'll share with you in a few minutes, we don't say to our partners, hey, when that happened, this happened, and is that what was intended? And partner goes, oh shit, no, sorry, not my intention at all. Oh, great, move on. Whereas otherwise we can take that as read, interpret it completely incorrectly, make assumptions. They say the biggest gap between a couple is a misunderstanding. So it's vitally important that we learn to communicate and clarify our communication. And part of the reason for that is that men and women are wired differently. As I said before, women process outwardly, we men process inwardly. And our brains, both men and women, are wired to focus on red flags only to keep us safe. I'll give you an example. At the top of the brainstem, physiologically speaking, there is a small part of the brain or an organ called the amygdala. Your eyes will see Auntie May coming through the front door. That's all you see is her walking through the front door of your house, but your amygdala will tell you whether she's your favorite aunt or one to avoid, and get the hell out of there. It's the place that stores lots of emotional memory, and I still don't know how it works, but that's what they believe is what happens. So when we're in a fight or flight situation, the signals from our surroundings come to the top of our brainstem. Our amygdala decides, is it good or bad? And usually if it's bad, then the fight or flight mode kicks off, and we don't even get from the back of the brain to the midbrain to the frontal cortex of our brain to make a reasoned decision. The fight or flight response is triggered from the back of the brainstem, and we're in one of those modes, and we're either fighting for our life or we're trying to get the hell out of there. And the amygdala doesn't have a green flag system; it only has a red flag system. So it's really important to remember that as we talk a little bit more in the next slide. And so because of that, we become more vigilant, funnily enough, for looking for negative signs and ignoring the positive, because that's the way we're actually primarily wired. And men's brains are wired for more logical thinking, right-handed, left brain dominant, more thinking function supported. And whereas women are, and that's why we always want to fix things, women are more right brain dominant, or can be more right brain dominant. And so recent neurological research has shown that generally, again, there's also more wiring in women's brain between the left and right hemispheres. So the corpus callosum, which is the band of brain fiber, if you like, that passes between the two hemispheres of the brain, actually holds, it allows women's brains to switch more easily between the thinking, feeling. And that's why they can oscillate often from what we call illogical thinking, which to us is illogical, but to them it's not, because they're moving from thinking to feeling to thinking to feeling. And so you'll see a situation where a woman might ask a man a question and she's waiting for an answer. He's now trying to get across to the other side of his brain because he's asked, how do you feel about this? And he needs time, and he doesn't get the time. And she gets frustrated because she's used to a rapid fire response from her girlfriends. And so she interrupts him while the very process is taking place, which trips him up, and then he has to start all over again. So very common for this miscommunication to happen. And one of the things I say to women is, if you ask your partner a question, shut up and just wait for him to answer. If it takes him 30 seconds, it takes him 30 seconds. If it takes him 3 minutes, it takes him 3 minutes. You create the space for the man in your life to answer the questions that you're asking. He will answer you. It just won't be at your pace. And because we're slower at responding to emotions, we have fewer neurological pathways that can support us doing that. So really important that we recognize that that's a fundamental difference between the way men's and women's brains are wired. What can also happen over time is a phrase that I'd like to introduce you to called negative sentiment override. When you first start meeting someone and things are starting to go well and you can't see any red flags, and you've agreed to meet somewhere and the other person is late, initially you go, benefit of the doubt, heavy traffic, phone was flat, they were driving, couldn't call me. So you give them positive sentiment override. However, when we get into a relationship and this behavior starts to be more prevalent and we start to see, for example, patterns starting to emerge here, we start to shift into more negative sentiment override. And when mistakes happen and upsets occur, the issue gets compounded. Now they are late because they didn't ring us, they're out with the boys, they didn't think of calling us, they don't care about us anymore. And so we've switched our dial, if you like, from the positive view to the negative view. And when we're in that negative sentiment override, it's really, really challenging to turn that back into positive sentiment override, doing the same things over and over again. You actually have to go on a bit of a journey to reignite the fondness and the admiration and the appreciation and the acknowledgement, and start getting into positive language so that you can turn the negative sentiment override into positive sentiment override. And the reason is, back to neuroscience, as I mentioned before, that because the amygdala on the brainstem only has a red alert system, not a green alert system, if you have a negative comment towards your partner, the Gottman Institute in the United States that we have taken on a fair bit of their study and their models. They've had a love lab going for nearly 45 years. John and Julie Gottman are incredible people, probably the best relationship people on the planet at the moment. And they show in their research that in a good relationship, for every negative comment you have or every negative you throw into the relationship field, you need 5 positives just to counteract it. But if you're in negative sentiment override, you need 20 positive deposits to offset that negative sentiment. So you can see that if you've got a relationship that's entrenched, it's been going for 10, 15 years, and you're constantly in that negative sentiment override, to dig that out of a hole, you have to then get into the fondness, admiration, appreciation, acknowledgement, gratitude cycle. And we have a program that we give to people that can do that over 30 days to actually retrain the conversation and the communication so that you can start repairing that negative sentiment override and turn it back into the positive style. Because what happens once we're in the negative sentiment override is we then stack the negative. And so we no longer give our partners the benefit of the doubt. It's because we're only wired to notice the negative. It can be hard to see the positive in them. So we have to make an effort to tell our partners what it is we like and love about them and what we're grateful for, and acknowledge them for that. As Amanda and I say, foreplay starts at breakfast. Men often come to us complaining about their lack of sexual intimacy, physical intimacy in their relationship. And what men don't generally know is that men often need sex, physical intimacy, in order to feel connected with their partners, because it opens their heart, whereas women need to feel connected to want to have sex. So straight away, we have this disconnect between men and women. The secret is, if emotional intimacy is constantly being maintained through fondness, admiration, appreciation, gratitude, acknowledgement, then the physical intimacy sits on top of that, and it's a far easier conversation to have to express our needs and desires. But we need that underpinning of emotional intimacy first, and the fluidity of communication at the emotional level for that to take place. So what changes in our communication? So the more we're invested in what we need to say than what we need to listen or hear. So that means we're often more readily able to talk than actually able to listen. And in fact, listening to understand is an incredible skill. If you've been in any situation in the last couple of days where you've been having a conversation with someone and you've heard something said to you that might be a bit challenging, or that you disagree with, or that you feel is unfair, or that you wanted to respond to rather quickly, while the person's talking to you, you'll be aware that you've got an inner voice starting to take over, and it's already starting to formulate the answer to this other person's commentary. So while that's happening, while that inner voice, and we're mulling over, assessing, thinking of our response, we're truly not listening to another human being. Now, we do a process in one of our workshops where we actually get people to sit and have a 10-minute uninterrupted conversation where they are truly, through a process that we teach, where they are truly sat in the situation to be heard and listened to without interruption, so they can be understood. And for some people, it's the first time in their life that this has happened. We talk about, we often talk without really paying attention to what we're registering from other people. So if a message doesn't land and our intention doesn't come across, then we're not achieving effective communication or resolving the issue. So imagine this operating in a conflict situation where there's a problem going on and your partner's trying to explain to you why they're pissed off, but you're already in defensive mode. You're already starting to package up the AK-47 for the response. There's no actual communication taking place there. There's only two people with different perspectives, different points of view, needing to be right. And that means if one's right, then the other's wrong. And that's why these conflicts often escalate and never get resolved. They become perpetual problems. And we can also have a negative attitude, a negative mindset. So we can feel that the person that's giving us some feedback, for example, isn't qualified. We don't trust them. It's an attack on our identity. There's a whole lot of reasons why we might find that conversation difficult, but ultimately we've got to tame that beast in our head, listen to what's being said, and then become curious and start asking questions about what's really going on. The Gottmans have a model they call the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Again, part of one of our workshops. Um, Criticism, contempt, then leads to stonewalling and defense. And when those four horsemen, as they call them, are running in a relationship, so someone's being critical and contemptuous, the other person is being defending and stonewalling, you can bet your bottom dollar that relationship hasn't got long to live, because those four horsemen of the apocalypse will destroy the relationship. And the Gottmans can predict with 95% accuracy, doing some research they do in a laboratory where they bring couples in, they put high-speed video on their face, they measure their respiration, their skin conductivity through a polygraph, and they watch their emotional response and ask this couple to have a conversation around a very difficult topic. And they can predict with 95% accuracy whether that couple will be together in 3 years' time. By the way, they discuss the conflict, navigate the conflict, and whether they repair the conflict or not. So fascinating stuff. And part of this is because when we do get into arguments, we tend to argue at what we call the surface level. That is that there's a conversation happening about the cup that was left on the kitchen counter, or the toothpaste, the cap left off the toothpaste in the bathroom, that then creates this backwards and forwards bickering. But what's actually happening is the argument is actually not about the toothpaste or the cap left on the bathroom counter. It's about something below that. It's about a person not feeling that they've got power and control over their decisions, or feeling they're being coerced, or feeling that the person doesn't have their back, or that they can't trust us, or they're not feeling respected or recognized, and do you value me? So a lot of these conversations that take place at the conflict level, it's really important to understand that often the argument that's wrapped around that, the bickering that can be wrapped around that, has got nothing to do with the topic at hand, and there's actually a deeper seated issue at play. And I'm going to share with you through, as we go a little bit further into this, some strategies as how you can get clear about what it is that you want to talk about to resolve some of these issues. And you can then use this with your partner so they can too have these tools and skills, and then together you can have really fruitful conversations around, particularly around conflict. Amanda and I say that conflict's inevitable, but combat is optional, and it's true. We argue quite a lot. We sit next to each other, we work together all day, we eat together, sleep together, live together, work together. Now we have lots of conflict around ideas about what to do with the business and coaching that we do. But the great thing about the relationship that I love with Amanda is we repair in minutes. We can often just have a heated Barney and then just laugh at each other and go, wow, look at that. There's some passion there, isn't that great? And one of us will offer the other one a cup of tea or make a coffee or something like that. So it's the repair attempt that's vitally important. And in order to do that, we have to take responsibility for us and how we're showing up, because change, I can't change in my relationship with Amanda. I can't change the relationship field. Only we can change the relationship field, because it's a co-created construct. I can change myself. I can change my approach. I can change my language. I can change my behavior. I can change the way that I show up. I can change what I say, the words that I use. I can change my tone to be more curious rather than defensive. And so if we take responsibility for our part in the dialogue, then we realize that we have the power to hurt, but we also have the power to heal. We all make mistakes. The best thing we can do when that happens is own it. Yep, my mistake. Sorry, I just wasn't thinking. Yep, lost awareness. Yep, I can understand why you're upset with that. Yep, I would be too if I was in your situation. So we can then have compassion not only for ourselves, but also for our partners. Those of you that know Gary Chapman, who's an author of a book called The 5 Love Languages, may not know that he also developed a whole science around apology language, which I'll come to in a second. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because apologizing in a conflict situation is an incredibly powerful step towards healing. It doesn't mean that you're taking full responsibility, but in any interaction where conflict's involved, it's never 50-50, as much as we'd like to think so. It might be 60-40, it might be 90-10. It doesn't matter. At some point, we have a contributing part. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a conflict situation, because it takes two to tango. So the advantage of apologizing and doing it well is that a good apology has to include an awareness of what happened, the responsibility of how we personally behaved. We can only take responsibility for ourselves. Acknowledgement of the impact on the other person, even if they hurt you too. And the apology basically says, okay, we've got to a point where something needs to change. We've made a mess together. I'm going to own my part, and I'm sorry for what I've done, and it'd be great if you could earn your part. And what's interesting, if you go onto the Gary Chapman website or just search for the apology language quiz, which is on the screen here, you'll find that there are 5 different ways that apologies are given and received. And when we do this in our workshop with our couples, they're often surprised. We get them to do the big reveal in the workshop. So they do their love languages, they do their Tony Robbins 6 core human needs, they do a values assessment, and they do an apology language quiz, and they keep that secret in their journal. And then they come to our workshop and they do the big reveal. And it's fascinating that they didn't know that, firstly, there were different types of apology languages and had no idea of what their partner's apology language was. And once you know that, it means you can now apologize in the way that your partner needs to receive an apology rather than the way you think they want to receive it, because it might not land. So be aware, that's a quiz that you can do that'll give you some deep insight into yourself and your partner. What gets in the way of a good apology is the discomfort in being vulnerable and fearing rejection or judgment. Some of us have grown up, I certainly did. I grew up in an environment, in a family. I was also born in England way back in 1957, born in Yorkshire. And when I grew up, apologies were just rare and hardly ever received at all. I don't think I ever heard my dad apologise in his entire life because he just didn't have the capacity to do that. And we don't like making mistakes, so we feel uncomfortable admitting when we have. And some apologies, unfortunately, can swim in murky waters. Oh, well, I'll say sorry if you want me to. That's not an apology. An apology is full restitution, full responsibility for our part in it. I'm sorry that my actions have led you to feel that way. It wasn't my intention to hurt you, rather than I'm sorry I made you feel. So we're taking responsibility for that ourselves. And what makes a better conversation is we can take responsibility for our own emotional state. Right now, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling angry, and I'm just not in a space to have a conversation with you about this topic. I'm going to go for a walk for half an hour, calm myself down, then I'll come back and we'll have a conversation. It's not always easy to say, but it's how we say it that counts. Sadly, good old Dumbledore, there are no magical words. There's no silver bullets on how to do this. So we have to frame our message to be sensitive to the recipient's frame of mind. And make sure that we're being mindful of what we're saying, how we're saying it, the words that we're using, the tone we're using, the look on our face, our body language. All of that is communication. I think it's something like 7% of communication is verbal, and the other 93% is non-verbal. The way we dress, the way we look, the tone we use, the pace we use, the pitch we use, the expression on our face, the way we stand. There's a huge amount of non-verbal in that as well. One of the things that I want to share with you is about the different types of communication. On these axes here, you can see that we have high openness to low openness on the vertical axis, and we have high consideration to low consideration on the horizontal axis. If we're a passive person, we're stuck in that bottom right-hand corner. So we're a passive communicator. That means we're considering others, but we have low openness. And what that means is that I lose in that situation because I'm the passive one, but you win. It's almost like the martyr role that some people play. And so we have fairly loose boundaries, and I don't care about myself, but I care about you. Often an older mother's response. In the top left-hand corner, we have the aggressive style of communication, which is all about I care about myself, but I don't care about you. So I'm out to win and you're out to lose, and I don't care about that. In the bottom left-hand corner, we have the passive-aggressive form of communication. Sadly, in the passive-aggressive situation, I'll do it just to piss people off, is the sort of thinking that goes on with that. So in the passive-aggressive form of communication, I lose and you lose, and I actually don't care. So it's a lose-lose situation, which, if you think about it, is absolutely crazy. What we need to learn to be able to do is be in this top right-hand corner with high openness, high consideration. And this is the point of assertive communication. It's not about getting our own way. It's about being assertive about what's being discussed, why it's being discussed, what's the outcome that I'm looking for, what's the outcome that you're looking for. And this is the realm of the I win, you win environment, the win-win situation. And some guidelines that you can learn around that are, firstly, be honest and open about how you feel. When that happened, I felt upset. Focus on what you want, not on what your partner did. When you did that, I felt upset because my expectation was that you were going to put the garbage out. No you, no finger pointing, no ego trips for the other person involved. Be specific about what you want. It would really help me if every Thursday you put the bins out because that's what you agreed to do. Have the conversation when you are calm. There's a great idea of if you go into a relationship with an AK-47, the relationship will rarely de-escalate. It will only ever escalate. You go with the AK-47, someone else has got an AR-15, and the conversation will just escalate and escalate. It rarely de-escalates. So it's really important you go into conversations of this type with what we call a softened startup, and I'll more about that in a second. So avoid statements that are judgmental or blaming. Avoid pointing the finger. Avoid, telling the person they're stupid, for example. Don't apologize for your wants and needs. There's nothing wrong with the needs and wants that we have as human beings. If you remember, if you go and fly on a plane, they tell you the first thing to do is put the oxygen mask on you before you put the oxygen mask on your child. It's just the same in relationships. We need to take care of ourselves first. We need to be clear about what our needs are, our wants are, and we need to be able to articulate that in a way that's not confronting to our partners, because our assumptions may be the barriers to developing a deep level of connection and safety. And often back behind that is the mindset in which we approach these conversations. Be mindful of our emotional and physical state. If we're charged, if we're angry, pissed off, upset, frustrated, we come into a conversation with that energy. That's how it will start, and it will de-escalate from there. Are we hungry? Are we tired? Are we angry? Are we frustrated? Are we feeling impatient? Do we have a bad day at work? Mindfulness and mindset in all of this is absolutely fundamental to the quality of the relationships and communications that we will have. Be mindful of your partner's frame of mind and emotional triggers. Have they just come home from work? Have they had a shit day on the road? Have they been stuck in traffic jams? Did they get a bollocking, from their boss today? So be aware of where they're at as well. Have some empathy for them. And don't try and manage our partner's emotional state. Things like, oh, don't be silly. Someone's expressing an emotion. Oh, you don't need to feel that. Don't be silly. That's just over the top. Well, might be to you, but it's their emotional state. Don't judge it. Allow for true feelings to emerge that might be underneath the issue, and focus on any strong feelings in their source. If you're feeling really upset, or your partner's feeling upset and angry, really important we give them the opportunity to explore that and ask, well, wow, there's some really intense emotion there. What's going on for you? And vitally important that we don't ambush. Good old Scott Morrison. That we don't ambush. We can agree on a time to sit down and have these difficult conversations where it's mutually beneficial, where we can say, hey, look, there's something I want to discuss with you. I'm really struggling with something in the relationship, and I'd really like to sit and have a chat with you. Can we do that, tonight at 8 o'clock after dinner or something like that? And use active listening to be curious to understand the other person's point of view and not to push your own point forward. As I mentioned before, use I language. The you language, you made me feel, does two things. It triggers the other person's ego, so they'll defend, and you're telling them that they have the power to make you feel something, which isn't true. No one can make you feel anything without your consent. And when we own our emotional state using I language, when that situation happened, I felt upset. It's me owning my emotional state, and it will prevent ego battles in relationships. In the art of listening, to use what's called active listening, be curious. No distractions, no judgments. Listen to understand and listen for any emotions that are in the conversation. Be vulnerable and share your own feelings. Yep, when you said that, you said you felt scared. Yeah, I feel scared about it too. Respect your partner's boundaries and don't consciously push their triggers. Nothing will destabilize that relationship field more quickly than knowing your partner's got a trigger point and you're going in there and deliberately pushing it. Show empathy, validate their feelings, use I language, create a safe space. Don't do it on the train, the bus, out in the field, at a restaurant. Make sure it's a safe space where you can both have the level of conversation that you need to have. Be prepared to compromise. The Gottman Institute talks about couples that stay together that become masters of relationships are open to the power of influence from their partners. So the partner comes up with an idea, they're not instantly dismissed. It's like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. Tell me more. Yep, okay, yes, we can do that. Do something differently. And often there's lots of compromise involved. And don't fight for the right to be right. We coached a couple of years ago, and one of the men in that relationship, the man in the relationship, I said to him, your self-righteousness, your need to always be right is going to cost you your relationship. And sadly, late last year, it did, because he refused to give up his right to be right and needing to be right. It's also important that we break patterns, negative communication patterns. And there's a 3-part formula that I want to share with you in how to open the communication. The first is, number 1, seek to understand. Ask really good questions. Yep, I can see you're upset. I'm not quite sure what's going on for you. Can you please tell me more? Share how you're feeling. Yep, I can feel that you're upset. I don't know why you're upset. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you're feeling. I'm feeling a little bit nervous at the moment because I'm not quite sure what's coming. But anyway, I'm going to sit here and stay in it with you, and state your need. If the person's being too vocal with you, it's okay to go, hey, I'm prepared to have this conversation with you, but I'm not prepared to do it while this level of tension is present and the way you're speaking to me feels disrespectful to me. If you want to change your tone, I'm here to have a conversation with you for as long as it takes. But unless that changes, I'm out. And then you set your boundaries and off you go. In your communication worksheet, which you can print out, there is a framework that you can use on how to structure a conversation if you want to have a crucial conversation with someone. Describe the situation. What happened? What am I upset about? What do I want? What's my truth? What do I think will happen if I tell the truth? Will this really happen? If I believe it, how do I know? Or is it an assumption? What are my rights in this situation? What are my partner's rights? What is going on for my partner? What's their situation? How does it affect me? How do I feel? What happened? What do I need? And what do I want from my partner? What specific action could my partner take to improve the situation? If you use this as a bit of a cheat sheet, be able to write out just some thoughts to get clarity around what it is we're trying to achieve, we'll be able to have much better quality conversations because we can go into the conversation with our cheat sheet and actually read it as a bit of a script to help us navigate what are often difficult conversations. One example for me, it says Joe and his ex-wife Cara, but I'll use an example for me, is a situation where I would ring up and say, hey, I'm aware you're busy, to my ex-wife. I'm aware that you're busy. I'm more than happy to go in early stages of our separation. I'm more than happy to go and pick up the boys from school. And her comment would be, no, it's my afternoon with the boys. I'm going to go and pick them up. I was like, okay. So I'd feel berated and criticized for caring about her and the boys not being late, being picked up from school. And then sure enough, an hour later, she called me back and go, oh, look, I've just realized I've got a busy afternoon on and actually it would help me to pick them up. It's like, well, I know, that's why I offered in the first place. So be mindful of the communications. You don't always necessarily, they don't always land the way you want them to land, but it's important to be clear about what you're doing, why you're doing, what the expectations, what your needs and wants are, and some outcomes that you're looking for. And then using the cheat sheet, you can use the dialogue that you've constructed. So in summary, construct a simple way without talk and blaming. You can be honest and specific, be focused on what you wanted, not what your partner did. You can remain calm, you can don't apologize and don't blame. And the 3-part formula can help you remain focused and calm and stop from blaming. You can be mindful, in my case, to my ex-wife's needs, and you don't have to place demands on them. And you can request to talk to them about something in the future. So you can use that cheat sheet as a construct to be able to do that. So thank you. I've got a few minutes more longer than I thought, but hopefully you've got some value out of that. You've learned a lot, obviously, about how to communicate more effectively tonight. There's a lot in that last 45 minutes. I suggest trying this out if you want to go down this path on small issues first before tackling a big issue. Something that's a bit niggly in your relationship, you're going to agree to your partner, you're going to have a conversation, you're going to use this format. You can show her that too, so you can be on the same page and use the same narration structure. And that way you'll get better at it before you and practice it. It's a new tool, and that way you'll get better at it before you then going into have a hard conversation about something that might be a little bit more sensitive and more emotional. We have lots of free stuff on our website, www.retune.life. There's information on there. There's a couple of testimonials, there's videos, there's free content around free resources. We have a free relationship health quiz if you want to go and do the health quiz and see where your relationship sits across 7 aspects. We do have a workshop coming up in Sydney on the 27th and 28th of May. We're about 75% full. If this is something that you think could work for you and your partner, if you're in a relationship and you want to get your relationship back on track, we teach couples over 2 full days. A lot of tools around communication, and so they go away with a lot more tools on their tool belt. So thank you for your time this evening, and we'll now open up the floor to a bit of Q&A. I've seen nothing in the chat window. Is there anyone online who'd like to go off mute and ask a question? Shane, go for it.
Yeah, g'day, guys. Great presentation, John. Really appreciate it. So my specific situation, I think you might be aware, John. So I'm newly separated now after 21 years, and communication is going to be the death of me. It really is.
Or not?
So, well, not now. I've got all the tools now, or well on my way. So the issue that I'm having, you referred to it as
negative sentiment override.
That's the one. I think of it as negative conscious bias.
Yep.
So you mentioned there with using the Gottman theories, which I absolutely love and 100% agree with. Mm-hmm. For every 1 negative, you need 5 positives. Trying to change that that negative sentiment override. That's my biggest. When
you're separated, why would you want to?
So we can just talk and have I'm trying to work out the parenting plan currently, but everything has come from you're just trying to do this, you're trying to do that. It's just well, it's from a place of care for the kids. That's a priority.
Some advice? Don't bother.
Yeah.
7 years on from separation of the mother of my kids, we get on really well. Had a beautiful conversation with her Tuesday afternoon at the parent-teacher interviews. We've finally it's taken 7 years. All I've done during that time is allowed her reality. I've gotten on with my life. I met Amanda. I got married. I've started a business with her. My oldest son's come to live with me, 3 or 4 years ago, and I've just put one foot in front of the next, day in, day out, maintain my sense of integrity, maintain my sense of honesty, maintain my sense of personal value, and the reason, one of the reasons we separated, or primary reason, is that she was projecting her unresolved childhood wounds onto me as her partner because she had unresolved childhood wounds with her father. So you can't change your ex-wife's perspective of you. She is looking at you through a lens of her own creation. You can't change that lens.
Yep.
So don't try.
Yep. Just
be you. Just go about your business, look after your kids, do whatever you can. And over time, all you can do is hope that she eventually sees you for the person that you are. But until she does the inner work to own that, which my ex did after we separated. So breaking the relationship actually gave her the opportunity to then go and do her healing journey, which she's now on and has done some tremendous work. And we're closer now than we've been in the last 7 years.
Fantastic.
And our kids are better for it. But I stopped trying to change her because I realised it's a complete waste of time.
Yeah. So that's my big issue at the moment. It's just like, we'll stop with the negativeness. Like, yes, we're separated, accept it, move on, but don't bring the boys into it. Like, let's talk about, X, Y, Z. But it comes to the communication, which, there's some great resources that you've spoken about tonight, which I am going to take away.
We hardly ever still talk about tetchy issues, but we email and we text.
Yeah.
That's become the modality, because in that she feels she has control of the frame when she emails and texts, and I get it. Because I can come in and ask some curly questions and she gets the shit. So it's easier for her to do it by text and email. And I'm fine with that. Yeah. It's a considered response.
Yeah.
And actually, probably of all the communication, unless it's something urgent, email is still our way of communicating. We have a Google Sheet that's a parenting plan that's both have access to. It's mapped out for the entire year. So we make sure that birthdays and Christmas and swap Christmases and all this sort of stuff. So she's very good at that. Mother's Day on Sunday, normally my weekend, but she's got the boys on the Sunday. We've never had an argument about who's got who on what day, and we have to be flexible around particular weekends and stuff like that. And the more we've collaborated and made the kids the focus, the better it's become.
Yes, that's the struggling point. Is it's not about the kids; it's all about the money. So, but anyway, thank you for answering.
Just focus on every time that happens, just say, look, yep, I hear you, but my focus is on the kids. My focus is on the kids. My focus is on the kids. And she'll hopefully eventually get the message.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
I've got a question.
Chris.
So in my situation, we have a lot of arguments over small things that then escalate, and it becomes, I think a lot of what you said is kind of, it's all based on misunderstandings, and get to a point where I kind of raise my voice and then want to kind of get into solution mode and resolve it there and then. But then my wife wants to wait, and I find it difficult, that whole period in between, waiting for her then to be in the right mind. So I feel like I then ambush her, and then that escalates even further. So we get to the point where we'll probably end up resolving stuff after a day or 2 days. But then the reason that we had the argument is we can't even remember the reason why, but the problem becomes that time it's taken to actually resolve the issue.
Yes.
And the worst times it happens is if you have an argument before you have to go somewhere, and then you have to, and I'm not very good at pretending that all's well when it's not. So yeah.
We don't know why, but if you look at the attachment theory, secure attachment means that we're brought up securely as children. We know our environment. We're not dependent on our parents, and we're okay if they leave. When they come back, we'll seek them out. There's a whole model wrapped around what's called secure attachment. Very few of us were brought up with a secure attachment model. We didn't get our needs met by our parents, not because they were cruel, just because they didn't know. And so this whole stuff with attachment theory is now grown from that. In relationships, there is always, and we don't know why this is, there's always a pairing of the avoidant attachment style and the anxious attachment style. Just from what you've told me, you would probably hold the anxious attachment pole. So you want to communicate, you want it resolved, and you want it done now. And your wife would hold the avoidant attachment pole. Sadly, it's also called the pursuer and distancer dynamic, or the pursuer-withdrawer dynamic. So as you pursue, she will withdraw. And as she withdraws, you will pursue. And as you pursue more, she'll withdraw. And this dance starts. And really the only way to navigate that is to hold where you are and be conscious of your attachment style.
Okay.
There is a fabulous TED talk. I will make a note to send it to you all tonight. It's only 18 minutes long. absolute, I think it's a TEDx talk actually, it's absolutely genius. And this woman maps how when you're in a conflict situation, you will default to your attachment style, which will drive the very nature of the argument itself. And you'll realize if you get below, as you've already said it, we rarely remember what the argument was about, because what actually happens is you devolve into your attachment styles and you start arguing about other stuff. And for you, it'll be your needs aren't being met. And for her, it will possibly be that you're over demanding or over needy or over something. It'll be too much for her. And that's simply you both playing out your attachment styles. If you know what they are, and you can be mindful of that when you're in that conflict situation and consciously not devolve to your attachment styles, it won't escalate.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting to know that there's science behind it, and it's not just something.
Absolute science. The funny thing was, in my relationship, I was the anxious, my partner was the avoidant. In Amanda's previous relationship of 13 years, she was the anxious and he was the avoidant. And when we got together and started doing this work, it was like, two anxiouses, who's going to do what? And it's turned out that I am still more the anxious, and actually Amanda's become more the avoidant in our relationship.
Okay. So if you had two avoidant people, would that mean that you just don't
Doesn't happen.
Stuff goes unresolved? Doesn't
happen. An avoidant usually won't be with an avoidant. They need an anxious one to show them some attention.
Oh, okay.
So two avoidants trying to get in a relationship is just like, who are you? Ships that pass in the night. There's nothing there. There's no charge, no polarity for that to happen. So yeah, it's weird, but the anxious and the avoidant always tend to pair up, and there'll always be one partner who will dominate that role.
Okay. Really
in the workshop that we do, we call it the island wave dynamic, where the wave is lapping on the shores of the island. Come and play with me. Come and play with me. I need your attention. I want to talk to you about something. And the island's going, I'm an island. I'm stoic. I'm not interested. And then the lapping shore becomes the 6 foot tsunami, 6 foot wave, then becomes a tsunami. When the tsunami hits, the island now gets flooded, and there is a thing called diffuse physiological arousal. It's measurable physiological state of a flooded person, where the cortisol courses through the system. We get dry mouthed, foggy headed, can't think straight, and we just want to get out of there, and we'll stonewall and defend to the hilt to actually escape the situation. And I was coaching a couple a while ago, Kate and Ben. They're on our website, and I said to Kate, they actually had a workshop, and I said, yeah, this tends to happen in cycles like this. The wave builds, then it becomes a tsunami, and then it all gets sort of back to normal again. And Kate, she's gorgeous. She just went, 6 weeks. I went, oh, wow. Well, yeah, she said, every fucking 6 weeks we hit this. She said, I become the tsunami and I flood, poor bloody Ben, doesn't know what's hit him. And then he sort of gets up and, coughs and splutters and dusts himself off, and then doesn't do any change, which gives her the shits, but it takes 6 weeks. So she could even recognize how long that cycle took.
Right.
So be aware in your situation, whether there's a cycle, as keep a diary note, perhaps like in a journal, of when this stuff happens, and see if it comes in cyclic waves. Because it could be you driving it from your anxious attachment, being the wave, lapping at the shore of your island, and she's not responding. And then so you'll find something to be critical of to get a reaction, because some reaction is better than no reaction, and that will then cause the explosion, but at least now you're getting some attention.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
And round and round, guys. Unfortunately, till we become aware of the pattern. There's only 3 relationship loops, and that's one of them, the island wave. So when you become aware of it, you go, oh, look at that, we're in that loop again. Let's stop it. But it takes both parties to understand the dynamic, and then to acknowledge the dynamic, and then to do something to break the dynamic.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I'll send you that TED Talk.
Great. Thanks.
Well, that's 2.5 minutes over time. We did start 2.5 minutes late, but hey. Any other questions, Stu or Eugene? You guys good?
Thanks a lot, John. Great presentation. My situation is pretty similar to Shane. breaking that negative sentiment override. Wasn't the answer that I was expecting from you, to be honest, but great advice. Probably heard it from a few people before, but not something that I expected to come. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. Lived experience, unfortunately. But you're better off putting your energies elsewhere.
Yep.
And Stu, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, John. You've kind of covered my questions throughout the course of your talk and what the other guys were asking as well. So yeah, I'm good, thanks.
No worries. Well, take care, gentlemen. There'll be an email popping into your inbox tomorrow morning sometime with some links, and this video will get processed and put up onto a YouTube channel where you can go and watch it if you wish. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And if you need anything from us, you know where to find us. All the best and have a good night.
Cheers, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.